Printers are something that I see techs shy away from, especially older printers or printers that they're not really sure about the complexity, how it's hooked up, or how to tackle it. So if you get a ticket that says, my printer on my desk stopped printing, when I hit print, nothing happens, my network printer, I can't print to it anymore, I need a certain printer added to my computer. Do you know those things? Are you confident to be able to troubleshoot them when those tickets come in? And if not, give you an excellent base and all the things that we run into daily. That way you'll have that confidence when you go to troubleshoot those printers. So I'm going to speed it up and let's get into it. So there's really 4 types of printing. So you have your local here, which is just your computer, and it uses a USB cable and it goes to a computer. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. Even installing those, you probably have them at home. So you just connect your computer with a USB cable to your printer. And then we have networked, where our printer actually has an IP address and our computer is talking through the network. Then we have print servers, where our computer is sending the print to the print server, and then the print server is actually going to the printer. And then we have something that I'm going to refer to as software based, where your computer actually uses the software that's installed on it, and then the software is doing the job of sending it out to the company that owns the software servers, and that is actually controlling and sending it to the printer. So what I want to do is I want to go over these, such as I'm not going to spend a ton of time showing you guys how to install a local printer. I'm sure you've done that at home, but there are a few things that we do run into with ports, and it's going to help us down the road. So I'm just going to brush this one, and then I will show you how to add a network printer and some of the things that we run into. I'll explain some print servers, and then I'll explain a little bit about software based. That way you can identify those when you are running into problems. So let's briefly talk about this local one here. We'll get into a few things that you might not know or that we're going to be troubleshooting with either over the phone or in a ticketing system, because even though we covered some of the common sense things like the cable not being plugged in or the printer just not being on, there are some port things that I want to show you, and then we'll quickly move on to the network portion, and then I'll follow these up at the end. So if I pull up my control panel, I can get into my devices and printers here. So I just did run control, open up our devices and printers. You can see my Lexmark is installed here, and it is installed locally with a USB cable. So if I actually wanted to add it, like I said, I don't want to go too deep into this. I'm sure you guys already understand. We can hit this add printer, and then the printer that I want isn't listed. So we'll click here. Local is at the bottom. We'll hit next, and then we can choose our port here. So this printer is actually plugged into USB 001. So I would choose that, and then I would just next all the way through it, pick my driver. If your driver's not here, like you can see on mine, there's not a lot of options here. Just hit the Windows Update. It's going to take 10,000 years, but eventually it will populate all the brands from the Windows Update, and then you can pick your driver. But what I really wanted to show you about local printers, the things that I have the most trouble with, the printer will be grayed out. So if I were to unplug it, you'll see how it goes gray. So if you see that, it's more than likely just unplugged. I plugged it back in, it came back. So if you see that on someone's computer, they put in a ticket, that's the first thing that I'm going to check if it's local. The other thing that we want to look at is the connection. So if we right click, go printer properties, go to ports, I can see that it is on USB 001. So if it's on the wrong port, this is where I can change it to the correct port. So these LPT ones, so they're parallel ports and then these serial ports here. And the reason I want to go over that is because sometimes when you're dealing with finance and they're dealing with carbon copies, meaning that the printer is actually printing a hard copy that is carbon, so it's copying to the bottom. Some of those printers can be really old and they'll actually be a parallel or a serial port. And some people shy away from those because those are probably a little bit before our time. I've had to deal with them a lot, so I want to show you kind of how I work with them. Most USB printers, when we plug them in, they're just going to automatically connect and automatically install. Parallel and serial printers aren't going to do that. So the computer is either going to have a parallel or a serial port on it, or they'll either do parallel to USB or serial to USB. So if I open up my device manager, and this is how I like to do it, I like to just right click and then hit manage. When the box pops up, I can just hit device manager here. If I open this up, so this COM port, so these serial ports or these parallel ports, you can see that I have a USB to serial adapter plugged into my computer right now. It's actually my adapter that's allowing me to connect to my switch, not my printer, but I wanted to show you this. So if you plug in a serial cable to a printer and then you plug it into your computer, a lot of label printers, if you're in manufacturing, might have these, and then you go to add these printers. Since it's not going to auto populate, when you pull this down, which one do you use? Now, most of the time I'll just use COM1 and then it'll work. But if I'm starting to have problems, like I install the printer and then it just doesn't print, the first thing that I'm going to check, so if I were to do COM1, and on mine, if I were using this adapter, it's actually COM4, you can see it here. So you can see that in your device manager. So same thing with these LPT ports. So if I had a parallel port to USB or just a parallel port in general or a serial port in general, it will show up right here and I'll actually tell you which port. And you can go into the properties and you can actually change these ports to 1, 2, 3, or 4 if a company is specific on it. But one more trick that I use often, so we can see that my Lexmark is here. So someone calls in and they say, my printer's not working, we go in, it's gray. Then what we'll have them do is unplug the printer and plug it back in. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like in the device manager. I usually pull this up remotely on their computer so I can watch it to see if the computer is actually seeing it. So if I unplug this, you can see that it flashed and my Lexmark went away. And then if I plug it back in, now it's going to make that noise as well, that boom. But if there's speakers around, you'll be able to hear it. If not, or if they don't notice it or they don't see it in the bottom right by the clock, this is a good way to look at that and see if the computer is actually seeing the printer. I say 90% of the time, the printer is either off or it's unplugged from the USB when it's grayed out. The other thing that could happen, we expand the bottom here and we see this universal serial bus controllers, and we see something that's in here that might have a little caution symbol. Sometimes the port is acting up. So what we can do is we can right click and uninstall if that port is showing a caution symbol or unknown. And if we uninstall it, what we want to do is we unplug the printer again, plug it back in either to power or the USB, or if we want, we can go up here to actions and then we can do scan for hardware changes. And this will actually scan the computer. So if we uninstall that, plug it back in, it doesn't automatically see it. You might have to hit this actions button, scan for hardware changes, and we'll get that same blink, and then we see if it still has the caution symbol. If it does still have the caution symbol, I would probably go to the printer provider. So whoever, if it's HP or Dell or whatever it may be, Lexmark, and I would get the actual driver and use the full installer and see if I can't get it to see it that way. Or I might do a USB driver for the actual computer itself. The other thing that I wanted to show you, and this is not really necessarily for local printers only, but as we're getting into network printers, this works on network printers as well. But if we right click here, go to printer properties, and then we go to advanced, this is where we're actually going to see our driver. So if someone installs a printer, or if you install a printer and it starts printing out thousands of pages of wingdings, or the print's not right, something along those lines, check here and make sure that the driver is actually correct. And if it's not, you can hit this new driver button and go through the wizard, or if you wanted to, you could have them load a disk if they have a disk drive, or download it online. One thing I do want to say about printer drivers, we have about 100 different kinds of Toshibas throughout our company. They're all pretty similar, but they're like an E-Series 350, 250, 3500, 3750, whatever it is. Honestly, if I don't see the driver in the driver list, so if I go through here and I don't see my driver in here, so let's say I have a Lexmark T651, I won't bother trying to find the T651. It's more than likely the same driver as the T652 and the T650. So if I had a 651, I'd probably just try one of these, but you got to watch the printer, because if you do use the wrong driver and then you print, it might start printing out hundreds of pages and you're going to blow through their ink and they're going to get upset. So a good example of this is the printer that I actually have installed, this Lexmark. It's actually an MS811. There actually is no MS811 driver that I know of. This is actually from the CD. So this is the correct driver, but on the printer itself, it says MS811. It's using this MS10 series driver. Also, the new printers that I'm actually using at work are MS823s. Those will actually use the MS810 driver. So it's pretty far off, MS810 to MS823. So that being said, it's sometimes worth a try rather than sitting and waiting for Windows updates to see if the actual driver exists. So sometimes it's worth it if you're in front of the printer, or if the user is diligent enough to stand in front of the printer and do it for you, just to click this driver, try it out, and then move on from your day rather than hitting this updates button. It just takes a long time. So now that we've covered some local printing, whether it's local printing or network printing, I want you guys to actually understand how the print moves through the computer to the printer. And the reason is because we have tons of spool service issues. And what I mean by that is there are services that help the computer do jobs. And if that service is having a problem, you're not going to be able to print. So if someone says, I can't print all of a sudden, or if their printer is grayed out and we've checked everything, sometimes you want to check that service really quickly. So I want to go over how that actually works. Also, the little tricks that I use all the time. So if I have my printer here, so I unplug my printer, and it's grayed out. So if I do see what's printing, so I right click on it, I can see that these two prints are stuck right here. Sometimes when we try to delete these prints or we try to cancel them, they'll just hang there, and then you'll be sitting there for a really long time while the computer decides to try to do its job. So this is going to be one of those tricks that I'm going to show you, but also we want to check that spool folder. But let me explain it first. So when you originally initiate a print on your printer, so you have an Excel open or you have a web page open, you hit print, what it's going to do is it's going to send it to a spool folder. And then the spooler is actually going to do the job of sending it to the printer. Once the printer receives the job, it clears it out of the spool folder, so it's no longer there. So once the printer receives the job, if it's hung up in the printer itself and you unplug the printer and you reset the memory of it, it's not going to have that job. So kind of keep that in mind when people say, hey, I just printed 10,000 things. Make sure that they can print it again before you move forward. But really, I want to show you this relationship here between the computer, the folder, and then the actual spool service. Now, I don't expect you to remember this path, because by the time that you use this, you're not going to remember it. But the point is that you understand that this folder is here, and this is a concept that you can use. That way, when you run into it, you say, hey, remember that I can delete these out of the spool folder. You just Google, where's the spool folder, or printer folders, and then you'll be able to find this path. Because the first couple times this isn't going to stick. I've just used this trick so many times that I remember it off the top of my head. So we go into printers, and these are actually my two prints right here. So I can delete my prints right from here, and what it will do is it will clear it from this what's printing box. The problem is that this folder uses the spool service. That's why I put this spool on top of this folder. So this folder relies on that spool service. So if I try to delete these right now, it's going to yell at me. It's going to say these files are in use by the spooler. So you might see those in other things that you troubleshoot too. If it says you can't move this or you can't delete this because it's in use, it's more than likely a service. So same way that we get into our device manager, we just right click here, do manage. Here's my services folder right here, and I can expand this and hit services. And this is going to give me a list of services. So I'm going to go down to print spooler, and sometimes people get a little bit confused. I've seen people that are looking for spool because the folder is called spool, but in the service it's called print spooler. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this service, and once I stop it, I can see that the status is different in this bar. So originally it said running just like this one. Then I can go back to this folder. I can delete from here. I can restart my service, and then if I look in my what's printing folder, those prints are now gone. So remember I said that we have print spooler issues all the time, and there's one way to really identify that you're having a print spool issue. So to show you that, I'm going to plug my Lexmark back in. That way it's not grayed out. None of these are grayed out. So if the print spooler is having an issue, then you'll see that all of your printers are going to be grayed out. And that's because that print spooler service is stopped. And sometimes you'll run into this really quickly because you'll open up the box, and if you scroll up, this is kind of the default. When you click on it, you won't notice that the printers are actually grayed out. So you'll hit add printer, and then you'll hit this, and you'll end up getting this error. This is actually going to tell you that the print spooler service is not running. The first thing to do is always just to go into these services, try to start the spooler. If it fails to start, just restart the computer. And then if not, you're going to have to start Googling. It actually happened to us a couple months ago. It probably happened to almost every single company, but Windows put out an update and it broke the spooler, and I had to start Googling. And then eventually on a forum, I noticed one of the files in Systems 32 was broken. Just delete it, restart the computer. It would rebuild it on its own, and it actually did fix the problem. That was just a workaround. I could have done Windows updates, but I had so many users. I couldn't stop all of them from working to run Windows updates because it could take a really long time. So that was the workaround. I found that on Google. I found it on a Windows forum, so keep that in mind.